Maybe next time we teach the maid how to speak English before letting her near our guests. The laughter hit the room before the words had fully landed. Crystal glasses trembled softly against polished walnut tables as several executives smirked into their drinks. At the center of it all stood Maya Brooks, her silver serving tray balanced perfectly in her hands. She did not move. She did not react. But the heat climbing into her cheeks felt impossible to ignore. Across the room, Charles Whitmore leaned comfortably in his chair, one arm draped over Italian leather. The billionaire's grin widened as a few investors chuckled along with him. The ballroom overlooking Manhattan glittered with gold light from massive chandeliers, but somehow the air felt colder around Maya. "I am sorry, sir," she said quietly. Her southern accent slipped through the words. "I did not catch that." Another burst of laughter rolled through the room. Charles shook his head. "That is exactly what I mean." Maya lowered her eyes and continued pouring coffee. Around her, conversations resumed. Billion-dollar negotiations. International acquisitions. Private equity strategies. The kind of discussions people assumed a maid could never understand. Yet, as she moved silently between tables, her attention drifted toward a group gathered near the floor-to-ceiling windows. 4 men in tailored suits. German. Their voices remained low enough that most people ignored them. Maya did not. Outside, rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights into rivers of silver. Inside, the men exchanged quick glances while Charles entertained potential investors near the stage. One of the Germans checked his watch. Another folded a document and slid it into a black leather portfolio. Then one sentence made Maya's grip tighten around the tray. Very slightly. Barely enough for anyone to notice. Anyone except her. The older German executive smiled as he spoke. The others nodded. Maya's heartbeat slowed instead of racing. That always happened when something serious appeared. Her grandmother used to call it the calm before the storm. She continued walking. Continued serving drinks. Continued looking like someone nobody would ever notice. But now every word from the window carried a different weight. Near the stage, Charles raised a champagne glass. "Tomorrow," he announced confidently, "Whitmore Capital will complete the most important acquisition in company history." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Investors smiled. Charles basked in it. The Germans applauded too. Their smiles seemed genuine. Almost. Maya glanced toward them again. One man was no longer smiling. He was watching Charles. Measuring him. Studying him. The way a poker player studies someone holding a losing hand without realizing it. A strange chill crawled through her stomach. Then it happened. One of the German executives leaned closer to another and whispered something so unexpected that Maya stopped walking for half a second. The words were soft. Precise. Dangerous. Her fingers tightened against the tray. A coffee cup rattled gently. Nobody noticed. Nobody except Maya. Because she understood every single word. And what she had just heard suggested that by this time tomorrow, Charles Whitmore might no longer control his own company. Across the room, Charles laughed loudly at another joke, completely unaware. Maya stared at him. Then at the Germans. Then back at the contract folder sitting beside the stage. The same folder Charles planned to sign in less than 24 hours. The rain hammered harder against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across Manhattan. And as one of the Germans quietly reached for the contract and smiled, Maya realized something terrifying. They were not negotiating a partnership. They were setting a trap. Maya forced herself to keep walking. The silver tray felt heavier now, its polished surface reflecting fragments of gold chandelier light as she moved between tables. Around her, laughter continued. Investors exchanged business cards. Waiters crossed the ballroom carrying champagne flutes. Nobody else seemed to notice that a billion-dollar disaster might already be unfolding. Across the room, Charles Whitmore stood beneath the glow of a crystal chandelier, shaking hands and accepting congratulations that suddenly felt premature. Maya glanced toward the German executives again. The older man closed his portfolio with a soft click. Then he smiled. Not the smile of a future partner. The smile of someone already certain he had won. A cold knot tightened in Maya's stomach. She knew she should stay quiet. People like Charles never listened to people like her. Especially not after publicly humiliating her less than 20 minutes earlier. But the words she had overheard would not leave her mind. They had been specific. Deliberate. Calculated. The contract was not designed to create a partnership. It was designed to create dependence. One signature. 18 months. Then control would quietly transfer away from Whitmore Capital forever. Near the stage, a junior attorney opened the contract binder. Maya watched his eyes move across the pages. He looked confident. Comfortable. Completely unaware. Thunder rumbled again beyond the windows. Her pulse quickened. She turned toward the service hallway, intending to leave the ballroom entirely. Then she heard another voice. Tomorrow he signs everything. Maya froze. The German executive had stepped away from his group and was speaking softly into his phone. He still has no idea. Maya's breath caught. The man laughed quietly. Trust me. By the time he realizes it, it will be too late. The call ended. Maya stood motionless beside a marble column. Her hands felt suddenly cold. This was no misunderstanding. No translation error. No negotiation tactic. This was intentional. She looked toward Charles again. The billionaire was busy entertaining a cluster of investors near the stage. The same people who had laughed when he mocked her accent. The same people who would probably laugh again if she tried to warn him. Her eyes dropped to the silver tray. Then to the folded linen napkin resting beside the coffee cups. A decision settled inside her. Slow. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. Minutes later, Charles stepped away from the crowd. For the first time all evening, he stood alone. Maya approached carefully. Her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor. One executive noticed and rolled his eyes. Another smirked. Charles turned and immediately recognized her. What is it now? He asked. His tone carried the same casual dismissal. Maya swallowed. Sir, I think there is something wrong with the acquisition agreement. Charles blinked. Then laughed. Not loudly this time. Worse. Quietly. Like the idea itself was ridiculous. And how exactly would you know that? Several nearby investors overheard. Their attention shifted toward them. Maya could feel their eyes. Feel the pressure building. Because I understand what they were saying. Charles folded his arms. You understand German? The disbelief on his face triggered another ripple of amusement from the surrounding group. Maya held his gaze. Yes, sir. Silence stretched for a moment. Then one investor chuckled. Another shook his head. Charles looked almost entertained now. You expect me to believe that? Maya opened her mouth to answer. Before she could speak, a deep voice echoed across the ballroom. Actually. Every head turned. The older German executive had crossed half the room without anyone noticing. His expression was unreadable. His eyes settled directly on Maya. Then he looked at Charles. She understands German far better than your legal team does. The room went completely silent. Charles stared at him. Confusion flickered across his face for the first time that night. The German executive slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Then he handed it directly to Maya. The moment Charles read the name printed beneath hers, the color drained from his face. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Crystal glasses hung frozen halfway to lips. The soft hum of conversation vanished beneath a silence so sharp Maya could hear the rain tapping against the glass 40 stories above Manhattan. Charles snatched the card from her hand. His eyes dropped to the name. Then narrowed. Then widened. Around them, investors exchanged confused glances. The German executive remained perfectly calm. That cannot be right, Charles said. His voice was lower now. Less certain. Maya felt every eye in the room land on her at once. The same people who had ignored her all evening were suddenly studying her face, studying her posture, searching for clues they had somehow missed. Charles looked at the card again. International Strategic Language Consultant. European Merger Advisory Board. Maya Brooks. His jaw tightened. You expect me to believe my maid works for the European Merger Advisory Board? The German executive gave a small smile. Formerly. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Camera phones appeared. Tiny screens glowing in the dim chandelier light. Maya could almost feel the shift happening around her. Not respect. Not yet. Curiosity. Which was somehow more dangerous. Charles folded the card and slipped it into his pocket. If this is some kind of joke, it ends now. The German executive did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked directly at Maya. Tell them what Clause 27 does. Maya hesitated. The pressure in the room became unbearable. Every heartbeat felt louder. Every second longer. Charles crossed his arms. Waiting. Almost daring her to embarrass herself. Go ahead, he said. Since everyone suddenly thinks you are the expert. The words stung, but Maya kept her voice steady. Clause 27 transfers voting authority if projected growth targets are missed for 3 consecutive quarters. Several executives frowned. Charles shrugged. That is standard. Maya nodded. The English version says that. Silence. The German executive's smile faded. And the German version? He asked quietly. Maya swallowed. She could feel sweat gathering beneath her collar despite the cold air conditioning. The German version does not transfer temporary authority. A few heads lifted. It transfers permanent controlling interest. Nobody laughed this time. Charles stared at her. That is impossible. Maya met his eyes. It is not impossible. Across the room, one of Whitmore Capital's attorneys suddenly reached for the contract binder. Fast. The pages flipped. His expression changed almost immediately. Color drained from his face. Charles! The room grew even quieter. What? Charles snapped. The attorney looked up slowly. She is right. The words landed harder than thunder. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The German executive adjusted his cufflinks beneath the chandelier light. Calm. Patient. Like he had expected this exact moment. Charles looked from the attorney to Maya and back again. Confusion gave way to anger. Then disbelief. Then something else. Fear. Very small. Very brief. But Maya saw it. So did everyone else. How did you know? Charles asked. Maya opened her mouth. Before she could answer, another voice echoed from the far side of the ballroom. Because I trained her. Heads turned instantly. Near the entrance stood an older woman in a charcoal suit. Silver hair. Sharp posture. Eyes fixed directly on Maya. The color disappeared from Maya's face. She had not seen that woman in 5 years. Not since the day everything in her life had fallen apart. The German executive stepped aside respectfully. The woman walked forward. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown. Charles looked between them. Confused. Who are you? The woman stopped beside Maya. Her voice was calm enough to freeze the room all over again. The person who knows exactly why Maya Brooks disappeared from the international business world. Maya's pulse crashed against her ribs. Because she already knew what was coming next. And if this woman revealed the truth here, everything would change. The silence shattered into whispers. Hundreds of tiny phone screens glowed across the ballroom like scattered stars, recording every second. Maya could feel the room turning around her. Not physically. Socially. Emotionally. The same executives who had laughed at her accent were now staring as if they had never seen her before. The woman beside her did not blink. Her silver hair reflected the cold chandelier light as she looked directly at Charles Whitmore. 5 years ago, she said calmly, Maya Brooks was one of the most promising multilingual merger analysts in Europe. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Charles laughed once. Sharp. Defensive. And now she serves coffee at private events? The words landed harder than he intended. Maya felt them anyway. The old wound reopened instantly. The older woman's expression hardened. She left after exposing a fraudulent acquisition that involved powerful people who preferred silence. The room froze again. Charles's attorney slowly lowered the contract binder. One investor stopped recording. Another stepped closer. Charles looked at Maya. Really looked at her for the first time all night. You never mentioned any of this. Maya almost smiled at the irony. You never asked? The words hung in the air. Several people exchanged glances. Charles opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since the event began, he had no immediate response. The German executive folded his hands behind his back. Watching. Waiting. Across the ballroom, thunder rolled beyond the glass walls. Rain hammered harder against the windows overlooking Manhattan. Then another voice cut through the tension. There is something else. Every head turned toward the older woman. Maya's stomach tightened. She did not know what she was about to say. That terrified her more than anything. The woman reached into her leather portfolio and removed a thin folder. White. Unmarked. The moment Maya saw it, the color drained from her face. No, she whispered. The woman looked at her sadly. You deserve the truth. Charles noticed immediately. What is that? Nobody answered. The older woman handed the folder directly to him. The room became so quiet that the faint hum of the building's ventilation system sounded deafening. Charles opened it. His eyes moved across the first page. Then stopped. His jaw tightened. Then loosened. Then tightened again. This cannot be real. Maya took a step forward. Do not! Her voice cracked for the first time all night. Charles looked up at her. Confused. Then back at the page. The investors around him sensed the shift immediately. Something larger was hiding beneath the contract scandal. Something personal. Something dangerous. Charles flipped another page. Then another. The blood drained from his face. You reviewed Whitmore Capital's merger strategy 3 years ago? Maya closed her eyes. The room exploded into whispers. Charles looked stunned. My company offered you a senior executive position. Maya remained silent. You turned it down. Silence. Charles looked back at the documents. Not only turned it down. You were the highest rated candidate in the entire selection process. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The revelation hit harder than the contract itself. The billionaire who had mocked her accent had once tried to hire her into his inner circle without even realizing it. Cameras lifted higher. Investors exchanged shocked looks. Charles slowly lowered the papers. The confidence that had carried him all evening was gone. Cracks had begun to show. But before anyone could speak, Maya's eyes locked onto something inside the folder. Her pulse stopped. A page she had never seen before. A document that should not exist. Her hand trembled. Where did you get that? She asked. The older woman's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. Then, from across the ballroom, the German executive suddenly stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, he said quietly. You should read the last page. Charles frowned. He turned to the back of the file. The moment his eyes landed on the final document, every trace of color vanished from his face. His hand began to shake. And for the first time that night, Charles Whitmore looked not embarrassed, not angry, but genuinely afraid. Charles stared at the final page as if it had reached out and grabbed him by the throat. Around him, the ballroom dissolved into a blur of whispers, camera flashes, and nervous glances. The rain outside hammered against the glass walls so hard it sounded like gravel striking metal. Nobody cared about the acquisition anymore. Nobody cared about the investors. Every eye was locked on Charles Whitmore. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the document. Where did this come from? He asked. His voice was barely recognizable. The older woman did not answer immediately. Maya could hear the faint hum of the building's climate system overhead. Could hear someone's phone vibrating on a nearby table. Could hear her own heartbeat. Answer me, Charles demanded. This time louder. The older woman finally spoke. It came from your own archives. A wave of confusion spread across the room. Charles looked stunned. That is impossible. Maya stepped forward. Her eyes never left the document. She recognized the logo. Recognized the formatting. Recognized the signatures. Her stomach dropped. No, she whispered. It cannot be that file. Charles looked at her sharply. You know what this is? Maya hesitated. The entire room seemed to lean closer. I know what it was supposed to be. Silence. Charles unfolded the page again. His breathing grew heavier. Then explain it. Maya's throat tightened. 5 years of buried memories pressed against her chest. She had spent years trying to forget. Years convincing herself that chapter was over. Yet here it was. Sitting in the Billionaire's shaking hands. That report identified a hidden control structure buried inside multiple international acquisitions, she said quietly. The same structure I warned regulators about. Several investors exchanged alarmed looks. One attorney immediately opened a laptop. Another stepped away to make a phone call. Charles looked between Maya and the page. And according to this, he stopped. His jaw clenched. The room waited. According to this report, Whitmore Capital was already targeted once before. The words exploded through the ballroom. Gasps. Whispers. A phone slipped from someone's hand and hit the marble floor. Maya closed her eyes. The room was spiraling. Exactly as she feared. Charles looked furious now. Not at Maya. Not at the Germans. At himself. Why was I never told this? Nobody answered. The silence felt dangerous. Then one of the senior attorneys stepped forward. His face was pale. Sir? Charles turned sharply. What? The attorney swallowed. The dates. What about them? The attorney's fingers trembled over the screen. The acquisition structure from 5 years ago and the one we are reviewing tonight. He stopped. His voice nearly failed. They are identical. Complete silence. Even the whispers died. Maya felt the floor vanish beneath her. Across the room, the German executive no longer looked confident. For the first time all evening, concern flashed across his face. Real concern. The older woman noticed it too. Charles did not. He was staring at the contract binder, as though it had become something alive. Something poisonous. You are telling me, he said slowly, that someone has been working toward this for 5 years? Nobody answered because nobody knew. Then a sharp electronic chime echoed through the ballroom. Heads turned instantly. One of the attorneys was staring at his laptop screen. Frozen. Sir? His voice cracked. Charles looked up. What now? The attorney turned the screen around. Maya's blood ran cold. A live financial alert filled the display. Whitmore Capital stock had begun collapsing. Not tomorrow. Not after the signing. Now. Investors immediately reached for their phones. Conversations erupted. Screens lit up everywhere. The room transformed into controlled panic. Charles lunged toward the laptop. Numbers were dropping by the second. Millions. Then tens of millions. Vanishing in real time. Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. This was impossible. The deal had not even been signed yet. Then she saw it. One small detail buried inside the alert. A single name. A company listed as the source of the market leak. The moment Maya read it, every muscle in her body locked. She knew that name. She knew it better than anyone in the room. Slowly, she looked toward the older woman. The older woman was already looking back at her. And from the expression on her face, Maya realized the nightmare was even bigger than they thought. The panic did not disappear. It simply changed shape. Moments earlier, the ballroom had been drowning in noise. Now it felt trapped beneath a layer of ice. Phone screens still glowed. Financial alerts still flashed. But the conversations had become whispers. Careful. Nervous. The kind people used when they realized they might already be standing inside a disaster. Maya never looked away from the company name on the attorney's screen. The letters seemed burned into her memory. Across the room, Charles Whitmore stood motionless beside the laptop. The billionaire who had commanded every conversation that evening now looked strangely small beneath the chandeliers. His breathing was steady, but only barely. The confidence was gone. In its place sat something unfamiliar. Doubt. The rain continued sliding down the glass walls behind him. Silver streams against the darkness of Manhattan. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a phone vibrated softly against a marble table. Nobody turned toward the sound. Every eye remained fixed on Maya. She could feel it. The weight of hundreds of silent questions pressing against her shoulders. Why did she know this company? Why had she gone pale? Why did she seem less surprised than everyone else? The older woman watched her carefully. Not speaking. Not moving. Waiting. Maya finally lifted her eyes. How much has the stock dropped? The attorney checked the screen. His voice sounded distant. 12%. Several investors closed their eyes. Others stared at the floor. 12% in minutes. Millions disappearing faster than anyone could process. Charles swallowed hard. That is not enough to trigger a collapse. Maya nodded slowly. No. The room held its breath. But it is enough to create fear. The words landed quietly. Yet somehow they carried more weight than any shout that night. Charles looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at the maid uniform. Not at the accent he had mocked. At her. His eyes searched her face as if trying to solve a puzzle he should have understood hours ago. You know something, he said. Maya did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted toward the rain-streaked windows. Reflections danced across the glass. Investors. Attorneys. Billionaires. People who spent their lives believing money protected them from uncertainty. Tonight uncertainty had walked straight into the room. And it was wearing a serving uniform. I know that company, Maya said softly. Silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The older woman lowered her eyes. Charles took a step closer. How? Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the silver tray she still carried. The tray nobody had asked her to put down. The symbol of how everyone in this room had chosen to see her. Because I investigated them. Several heads snapped up. A few people exchanged alarmed looks. Charles froze. When? Maya looked directly at him. 5 years ago. The answer struck the room harder than the stock collapse. The older woman closed her eyes briefly. As though a door had finally opened that could never be closed again. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. The silence became unbearable. Maya's voice remained calm. Too calm. The report everyone keeps talking about tonight. She paused. I never finished it. Confusion spread instantly across the crowd. Charles frowned. What do you mean? Maya's eyes drifted toward the final page inside the folder. Someone shut the investigation down before I could prove who was behind it. The whispers returned. Quieter than before. More dangerous. Charles looked back at the documents in his hand. Suddenly they seemed incomplete. Like pieces of a puzzle missing their most important section. The older woman finally stepped forward. Maya. Her voice carried a warning. Maya heard it. So did everyone else. The room tightened again. Charles noticed. What are you not telling me? Neither woman answered. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. Deep. Distant. The windows trembled slightly. Then another alert appeared on the attorney's screen. He stared at it. Frozen. His face lost all color. Sir? Charles turned. What now? The attorney swallowed. His lips barely moved. The leak did not come from outside Whitmore Capital. The room went completely silent. Charles stopped breathing for a second. What? The attorney slowly rotated the screen toward him. Maya looked too. And the moment she saw the name attached to the leak, her heart sank. Because it was not a competitor. Not an investor. Not the Germans. It was someone inside Charles Whitmore's inner circle. Someone standing in this ballroom right now. The silence after the attorney spoke felt heavier than the stock collapse itself. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at their phones anymore. Every investor, every executive, every journalist in the ballroom was staring at the screen. The leak had come from inside Whitmore Capital. From someone standing among them. Charles Whitmore slowly turned away from the laptop. The cold chandelier light carved deep shadows across his face. His confidence was gone now. His authority was hanging by a thread. Who is it? He asked. The question barely rose above a whisper. The attorney hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Maya already knew. She had seen it hours ago. Seen it in the contract language. Seen it in the market timing. Seen it in the fear that flashed across certain faces whenever new information appeared. The older woman looked at her. Not surprised. Almost relieved. You know, do not you? She asked softly. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward Maya at once. Earlier that evening those same eyes had looked through her. Past her. At best, they had seen a maid carrying coffee. Now they waited for her answer. Maya exhaled slowly. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. It was never about the contract. Confusion rippled through the room. Charles frowned. What does that mean? Maya stepped toward the laptop. Her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the silence. The contract was bait. Nobody interrupted. The stock leak was the real attack. One investor lowered his phone. Another leaned forward. Maya pointed toward the financial alert. Whoever leaked the information knew exactly when fear would spread fastest. Charles stared at the screen. His breathing grew heavier. Then who did it? Maya's eyes moved across the room. One face. Then another. Watching reactions. Watching body language. Watching who looked nervous and who looked surprised. Then she stopped. Across the ballroom stood a senior executive from Whitmore Capital. Robert Keller. 40 years with the company. Trusted by everyone. Admired by investors. Considered family by Charles himself. Robert's expression never changed. But Maya noticed one detail. His hand. Trembling. Just slightly. No, Charles whispered immediately. Not Robert. Maya did not answer. The room tightened. Robert forced a smile. This is ridiculous. His voice sounded controlled. Too controlled. We are really taking accusations from a hotel maid? A few people shifted uncomfortably. Hours ago that line would have worked. Now it landed differently. Desperate. Defensive. Maya met his gaze. You leaked the information 3 minutes before the market opened in London. Robert laughed. Nobody joined him. You have no proof. Maya nodded. Not yet. Robert relaxed slightly. Then Maya continued. But you made one mistake. The room froze. Charles looked between them. His pulse visible in his neck. Robert's smile faded. What mistake? Maya pointed toward the financial report. The leak originated from an internal account tied to a subsidiary that no longer exists. Several attorneys immediately looked back at their screens. Fingers began moving rapidly across keyboards. The room filled with the soft clicks of keys and the faint vibration of incoming alerts. Robert took a step backward. Nobody missed it. Charles saw it too. The billionaire's face changed. Slowly. Painfully. Like a man watching a bridge collapse beneath his own feet. Robert. The name sounded almost broken. Robert looked away. The attorneys stopped typing. One of them stood up. Pale. She is right. The words detonated through the ballroom. Gasps erupted everywhere. Phones rose higher. Investors stared openly now. Robert's shoulders sank. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough. Enough for everyone to understand. Charles closed his eyes. 40 years of trust shattered in a single moment. The humiliation Maya had carried all night suddenly seemed to reverse direction. Not because she celebrated. Not because she demanded recognition. Because she simply stood there and told the truth while everyone else missed it. Robert looked at Maya. How did you see it? Maya answered honestly. Because it was the same pattern I uncovered 5 years ago. Silence. Complete silence. Then the older woman stepped forward holding another document. Her expression was grim. There is something worse. The room immediately tensed again. Charles opened his eyes. Exhausted. Defeated. Worse than this? The older woman slowly handed the document to Maya instead of him. For the first time all night. Everyone noticed. Maya looked down. Her breath stopped. The paper revealed the name of the person who had ordered the original cover-up 5 years ago. The person behind everything. The person who had destroyed her career. And as Maya slowly lifted her eyes toward the crowd, she realized that person was standing only a few feet away. The ballroom did not erupt this time. It sank into silence. The kind of silence that arrives when the truth is finally too heavy to ignore. Maya stood motionless with the document in her hands. Around her, hundreds of people waited. Investors. Attorneys. Executives. Journalists. People who had spent the entire evening measuring worth through titles, wealth, and appearances. Now none of those things seemed to matter. The cold chandelier light reflected across the polished floor and caught the edge of the paper trembling slightly between Maya's fingers. Not from fear. From memory. Across the room, Charles Whitmore watched her carefully. The billionaire who had mocked her accent only hours earlier now looked as though he was seeing her for the first time. Not as a maid. Not as an employee. Not even as a former analyst. As someone carrying a burden nobody else had understood. The older woman lowered her eyes. She already knew what was written on the page. The question was whether Maya would say it aloud. The room held its breath. Maya looked up slowly. Her eyes moved through the crowd. Then stopped. The answer was there. Standing among them. Older now. More powerful. Better dressed. But unmistakable. The person responsible for burying her investigation 5 years ago. The person who had quietly destroyed her career before it ever reached its peak. Yet when Maya finally spoke, her voice contained no anger. I knew. The words confused everyone. Several investors exchanged glances. Charles frowned. You knew? Maya nodded. For years. The room froze again. Then why did you never expose them? Charles asked. The question sounded almost personal. Maya looked down at the document. Then toward the rain beyond the glass walls. Because nobody wanted to listen. Silence. The words landed harder than any accusation. Several people lowered their eyes. Others looked away completely. The humiliation that had followed Maya all evening suddenly felt visible to everyone. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just undeniable. Charles felt it too. The memory flashed through his mind with painful clarity. The joke about her accent. The laughter. The assumptions. The confidence with which he had dismissed her. His throat tightened. Across the ballroom, phones continued recording, but even the journalists seemed unsure what to do with the moment unfolding before them. Maya had every reason to expose people. Every reason to humiliate them back. Every reason to enjoy watching powerful figures collapse under the weight of their own mistakes. Yet she stood there quietly. Calm. Composed. Refusing revenge. And somehow that made the room respect her even more. One of the senior investors slowly stepped forward. His voice was barely above a whisper. You tried to stop this 5 years ago? Maya nodded. Yes. The investor looked stunned. And nobody believed you? No. Another silence followed. Longer this time. He looked around the ballroom. Then back at Maya. We owe you an apology. The words spread through the room like a wave. Nobody argued. Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes. The shift was complete. The same crowd that had watched her carry coffee trays now looked at her with something entirely different. Respect. The kind that cannot be bought. Charles closed his eyes briefly. The weight of the realization settled heavily onto his shoulders. Not just that Maya had been right. Not just that she had saved his company. But that his own prejudice had nearly caused him to ignore the only person capable of seeing the truth. When he finally opened his eyes again, they landed on Maya. I was wrong. The room became perfectly still. The words sounded simple. Yet coming from Charles Whitmore, they carried enormous weight. Maya looked at him quietly. No triumph. No satisfaction. Only understanding. The billionaire swallowed hard. About all of it. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. Even the rain seemed softer now. For several seconds, the entire ballroom existed inside a strange emotional stillness. Then the attorney's phone vibrated. Once. Sharp. Unexpected. Every head turned. The attorney looked down at the screen. His expression changed immediately. Relief vanished. Concern returned. He looked at Maya. Then at Charles. There is one more problem. The room tightened again. Maya felt it before he even spoke. The story was not over. The attorney slowly turned the screen toward them. A new message had arrived from an unknown sender. Attached was a single file. Time-stamped only 10 minutes earlier. And beneath it, one sentence. If Maya Brooks tells the full truth tonight, release everything. The message sat on the screen like a shadow stretching across the room. Nobody spoke. The rain had nearly stopped now. Water slid quietly down the glass walls overlooking Manhattan, and for the first time all night, the city lights beyond looked calm. The panic was gone. The shouting was gone. What remained was something heavier. Truth. The attorney looked toward Maya. What does it mean? She stared at the file attachment for several seconds. The glow from the screen reflected softly in her eyes. Around her, phones that had been raised all evening slowly lowered. Cameras stopped moving. Even the journalists seemed to understand that whatever happened next was no longer about headlines. It was about a person. Maya reached out and closed the file without opening it. The motion surprised everyone. Charles frowned. You are not going to read it? Maya shook her head. I do not need to. Silence followed. The older woman looked at her carefully. You know what is inside? Maya nodded once. The same thing that has been there for 5 years. Charles stared at her. Confused. Exhausted. Then why not expose them? The question hung between them. Maya looked around the ballroom. At the investors. At the attorneys. At the executives who had doubted her. At the people who had laughed. Then her eyes settled on Charles. Because proving I was right was never the point. The room fell completely still. Somewhere in the distance, a service elevator hummed softly through the building. The sound faded almost immediately. Nobody moved. Charles lowered his eyes. The weight of her answer struck harder than any accusation could have. He remembered the joke. The laughter. The assumptions. The way he had dismissed her before hearing a single thing she had to say. For a moment, he looked every bit as vulnerable as she had felt standing alone with a silver tray hours earlier. Slowly, he stepped forward. The billionaire who commanded boardrooms, markets, and headlines suddenly seemed like a man carrying something much simpler. Regret. Maya. His voice was quiet. Honest. I am sorry. No cameras flashed. No one interrupted. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. That was what made it powerful. Maya looked at him. The apology was real. Everyone in the room knew it. She could have reminded him of every insult, every dismissal, every laugh. Instead, she simply nodded. The tension that had gripped the ballroom all evening loosened almost imperceptibly. Investors exchanged looks. Attorneys closed laptops. Phones disappeared into pockets. The power in the room had shifted completely, but not in the way anyone expected. Maya had not won because she exposed someone. She had not won because she humiliated anyone. She had won because she remained herself when everyone else lost perspective. The older woman smiled faintly. The first genuine smile anyone had seen from her all night. "What happens now?" one investor finally asked. Charles looked toward Maya before answering. That alone told everyone how much had changed. Maya glanced once more at the unopened file. Then at the city beyond the glass. "No," she said softly. "People tell the truth." No one argued. The last of the storm clouds drifted away from the skyline. Pale morning light began to touch the edges of the buildings outside. It reflected across the ballroom windows and spilled onto the polished floor. The silver tray still rested in Maya's hands. For a moment she looked down at it. The object that had defined how everyone saw her when she entered the room. Charles noticed. Without saying a word, he gently took the tray from her hands and placed it on a nearby table. Then he pulled out a chair at the center of the boardroom table where investors and executives had gathered. Not at the edge. Not behind them. Beside them. Maya hesitated. The room watched. No speeches. No applause. No grand announcement. Just a simple gesture. An acknowledgement. A correction. A quiet act of respect. She took the seat. Across the ballroom, the cameras lowered completely. Outside, the first sunlight broke through the clouds and painted the windows gold. And as the city awakened beneath them, Maya Brooks sat at a table she had once served, no longer invisible, while the room that had laughed at her listened in silence.